Hello, everyone, and welcome to Digital Experience. We're going to be going over how we use Marketo on the about.gitlab website and in the marketing department, and just kind of go over from a very high level what it's all about. It's a marketing automation tool that people may or may not have a lot of experience with. And so we're going to be doing a little bit of a knowledge share for the rest of our front-end developer team here and full stack as well, and anyone else who wants to learn. So let's get started. First off, who are our company partners for Marketo? So in the digital experience team, we may be asked to update a form or something, and or create a form, and that may not be the right route. But Marketing Ops is the team that we work with. In particular, Amy Waller, who's in charge of the Marketo tool, is basically who we ask for a lot of these kind of questions. She's knowledgeable of the tool and the how to implement it sort of side of things, and we're kind of more the how do we JavaScript and CSS and put the form on a page sort of side of things. So yeah, and in terms of who on our team has experience with it, I do. Brandon, Tyler has mentioned he has experience with it, although not at GitLab yet, and every instance is different, as he mentioned. And so, yeah, what is Marketo? Marketo is a marketing automation platform, and similar tools are HubSpot or Pardot or Eloqua. And what that means is basically these are tools where you put a form on a page and someone fills out the form and you can automatically reply with an email that's got resources or something like that is one aspect of it. Another aspect is basically if you are sending an email, to follow up on an action that someone took. It doesn't have to be a form, right? It can be a sign up for your website and welcoming new members, or it can be a, something else like we met at a convention center. Here's an email that, goes over how to use our stuff, or any number of things really. So the point is it's it's a lead tool, marketing automation. So, let's say, your subscription is about to expire. They can send you an email, stuff like that. So how do we use GitLab or how does GitLab use Marketo? So I linked the handbook page here for Marketo that's managed by marketing operations, and it goes into how we use it. What does it do other than basically the automation aspect that I mentioned? It also syncs with other systems such as Salesforce, Demandbase, all these tools that we use that basically prepare sales to be able to contact people who need information about GitLab. And so, how do we do that? Actions that people take on the website will have a score attached to them. So, let's say they viewed a sponsored webcast, that gets them 20 points and puts them into a bucket in the Marketo backend system. If they interacted with Drift and scheduled a meeting, that means 100 points, and they are basically qualified at that point to talk to someone in sales. So pointing ensures that we don't contact them at the wrong time on their buyer's journey. We don't want to be annoying them with like, hey, we saw you viewed a page, come talk to us. And they're like, no, I'm not ready for that. That's a bad user experience and that kind of thing. So that's how kind of the lead qualifying works and scoring from the Marketo side of things. And it's all documented on those handbook pages. And yeah, so now kind of on, before I go any further, I forgot to talk about this earlier as well. At the top of the agenda doc here, I linked a page that is an epic in GitLab that basically goes over, a lot of links that I've experienced over time and issues that we've worked on in the digital experience team in the past many years, related to the About website and Marketo and how it works. And, it has some FAQ items like why do we serve forms using Marketo? Why does it cause bugs for some users, related documentation and code. So it's a good link to kind of go through And it has where the regression test Marketo. These are kind of core pages, sign up forms, demo page, things that are of high importance. And then it also goes over the different kinds of forms, right? So let's say you change shared code that impacts one form. You want to make sure you didn't break another form. It's got kind of an example of a lot of the different forms that we have on the About website. So where do we go from here? How do we use Marketo? So one example is a lead generation form. I talked about it earlier. Basically you're on the demo page and you want to sign up for something. You fill out this form on the right-hand side, and that's a form that's generated by Marketo. It's got all these different fields, and these are all created within the Marketo interface itself. Then once the it's got error states and all that good stuff. Some of these fields, let's say you select United Kingdom, state's not going to be there. So it's good to know that depending on how you fill out the form, different actions can happen. And so that's kind of how it works, on the About website, how we use it for lead generation. Another place we use it is, this is also a little bit of lead generation, but this is on the actual self-managed free trial sign-up form itself. So you can see that this displays differently. We do have some level of degree of the ability to style these, despite being in a third-party system. In the agenda doc here, I just mentioned to be sure to go through when you're styling and do not only the before the form is filled out, but also during. See, it's red, so there's an error state, so you got to make sure to account for error states. And as you saw on the demo page, once you fill it out, there's usually a some kind of success message. Thank you for signing up your free trial, and you notice the page scrolled into motion. The form scrolled, the success message scrolled into view. So that's something we do with JavaScript on our side. That's kind of examples of where we use it. And now another thing to be aware of, if you are in a region that is impacted by cookie consent laws, is basically what happens when you go to a page that has a Marketo form. Well, you notice this having trouble viewing or submitting this form item. And you can click on it and it tells you, a little bit about what you need to do. This is because in order to process the forms and do other things and use the Marketo system, currently the way things are set up, it requires a cookie. So basically, if you fill out this form without having accepted a cookie, I think it might work depending on how we have it set up currently. And you notice there's a little bit of styling error there because last person has styled it, or at some point someone styled this page and they didn't realize to make sure that they have that drop down there. And if you try and submit this without cookies, so you just get stuck on please wait and it never finishes. So just be aware that cookie consent forms can impact this. And the reason for that is because until we have consent to set cookies, we cannot set cookies, and they're legally. And therefore, the cookie consent platform intercepts before Marketo. So until you've accepted, you can't process the form. So that's kind of why there's this weird state. And we're looking to see how we can fix that long term. It's obviously not an ideal user experience, but it's just something to be aware of as we're working in Marketo.
And there's no way for us to trigger what's it called? Like maybe a pop-up to tell the user that, oh, sorry, this form cannot be submitted because you did not accept the cookie.
So we could do that. The reason we haven't done that, basically this was a quick fix. We would love to refine the user experience. And if you put a pop-up on the page before someone fills out the form, I think is the idea, that therefore they don't want to fill out the form because they don't want to consent to cookies. And so like it's kind of the user investment, right? Like I've already started to fill out the form. I therefore am okay with giving cookies, as opposed to like the first thing they see is please accept cookies before you can fill out this form. They're like, no, I'm going to bounce.
No, I mean when they click submit button. So when they click,
Oh, gotcha.
yeah, if we can
Yeah.
have an interception action that, oh, the form will not be submitted because you did not accept our cookie.
So that is something we can explore. There's a little bit of difficulty in the way the form submission process works. Basically, but yes, that would be a better user experience, to your point. Like some way.
Stored. Is it stored on the local storage?
I don't think so. I think it's basically what happens. I can show you the code here. Let's see. Well, there's the blocked resource notice.
I'm sorry that I'm taking our time. Because if it's stored in the local storage, we can first check if that user has the cookie accepted in their browser's local storage. Using that key or whatever to just check, then we can validate if the button can submit or not submit.
Go ahead.
CookieBot gives us like we don't have to do that custom. Like we get some hooks back from CookieBot that we could customize with that. I think the other thing here for consideration, just that we'd have to work with, is like I haven't seen how we do our Marketo forms, but like the Marketo forms I have embedded in websites are like they're individualized. So like there's not we can't write like a one handler that affects all of the form submission processes. They want to get their custom one. So like it's one of those things where it's like we certainly could, but there's probably a lot of far-reaching implications of making it like it's a bigger task than just the technical solve. It's like find where to do it, why to do it, make sure it doesn't impact existing assumptions that each one of these individual forms makes.
Yeah, so part of it is that the forms aren't something that we have static on our side. They are dynamically generated on the Marketo side by program managers who say, I need a form to sign people up to this event or something like that. And so the code will be a little different every time. So we don't have control over the HTML that Marketo returns, to my knowledge. We don't have control over their CSS or JavaScript. We can hook into their events, like clicking submit and stuff like that. And we can hook into CookieBot's events that say, basically CookieBot consent has not been given. We can try and attach listeners to those buttons, and we may have some level of success. I don't know. But anyway, so that's just to give an example. Here's the JavaScript that we have running shared for the Marketo forms on some of these. And, you can say, here's some set options for the Marketo forms. Here's where you load the form onto and append it to the page. Basically, you take, you say, hey, Marketo, give me this form. And they say, okay, here, I'm going to insert it into the div view specified. And then you have an on success event, which basically says once the button has been pushed and the form is successfully submitted, do all these other callbacks, which is where we have our Google Analytics, data layer push, and on some other forms, demand base. Okay, so here we go. So some of the demand base actions and other things like that. So, but this is a long way of saying, to Sami's point, that is not an optimal user experience. It's something we could refine, and if we had the resources to do that, it would be great to get a better user experience going for that. Where was I? So, yeah, and then another thing, I mentioned the message here, having trouble viewing or submitting this form. There is a JavaScript that controls how to generate this message. It differs between submitting this form, and this is a CookieBot attached thing. This is not a Marketo attached thing. This is just something that we've created over time that says CookieBot is impacting the action you're trying to do. So it can be attached to the search fields in the header of the About website, up here, basically. or on the handbook or blog search. It can be attached to, you're about to watch a video, but you can't do it because the YouTube cookies are blocked or something like that. So yeah, that's just another thing to be aware of is this CV extras JavaScript.
Awesome.
And go ahead.
I said awesome.
Cool. Yeah, and so another thing I just wanted to mention is the importance of regression testing on these forms. I know I brought it up earlier, but if you update one of these JavaScripts, it's really important to go over the important workflows. We don't want to break the pricing page. We don't want to break demo. We don't want to break, contact sales, these kinds of things. If for some reason it is broken, it's not the end of the world, right? We operate in Git, we can revert, we can, iterate quickly. So don't feel bad if you do, just please try and regression test any of these forms with extra caution.
Do you mean like manually regress, like manual test, or do you okay, there's no automated system that we have? Okay.
No, we don't have any automated tests. That's something we could look into adding. Certainly, there would be difficulty around. We're not exactly set up for that at the moment. But yes, that is a good point. We should probably write some automated tests.
And if we're doing manual testing, like I saw you writing like test data, like test 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. I don't want to be like messing with sales numbers or whatever, like submitting a ton of forms with dummy data. So is there a typical convention that we use for the state and the email and the whatever?
As far as I'm aware, there is not. I have asked about it in the past, and I have been told that, certain cleanup scripts or, bad data will be flagged and stuff like that. So theoretically, it should be fine. If we go back to that lead scoring sort of work, or there's a flow chart here on the handbook page that basically goes over, how the Marketo scoring works. And so there's, here's the raw data. It goes to, and it becomes an inquiry. They have an email address attached. It goes to the qualified lead system. And, basically, if it's bad data, it's just going to go here and then get set to 0 and then, or over here to bad data and then, removed from the system. And there are certain things that automatically get checked for. But that is a good question. I know at my previous company, we did not have that sort of a setup. And so, it was important to kind of have a certain thing appended to the end of an email address that you were trying to do that says, hey, I'm doing this on dev and test, not on production or whatnot. So, yeah. Some other things to be aware of are basically, I already mentioned if you select United States, another dropdown appears, kind of similar things can appear. So if you select Ukraine, I don't know if this is still true, but basically there's this extra checkbox that says, I do not live in the Crimea region, because of all the geopolitical sort of, I'm trying to think of the term, but basically, trade restrictions and that kind of thing. So there are little subtleties like that. The other thing is, sometimes we'll get from UX teams or whoever else, I don't want someone to have to select these checkboxes manually, like I want it pre-selected or something like that. Legally, we can't do that because of privacy laws, in certain regions such as GDPR, California's CCPA, and other countries have similar things. So it's off by default. Legally, it has to do that sort of thing. If you ever have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to Amy, as I mentioned in marketing ops, or potentially Lindsay over in our legal department may be able to answer as well. But yeah, there's a reason why certain things like that are done. And if you ever have a question, I can try and answer too. I may not know, but yeah, just be aware that, there are certain privacy laws that say we have to make it so people have to opt in rather than opt out. So yeah. Other things to know, who are the stakeholders in the Marketo system? A lot of it is done for demand generation. Let me zoom in here. This page is kind of zoomed out. Let's see. So, under demand generation on the org chart here, you see marketing programs. So Jackie and, some of the others here, Agnes and Zach, do a lot of work in landing pages. That's not on the about.gitlab itself. It's from in the Marketo system. They can generate landing pages, and we'll go over that in a minute. And then also Newt here is really great with the email sends. So, basically how we get our newsletters out to people. It's built in Marketo. Marketo isn't just, gathering those things. It's gathering the leads from forums or wherever, it's acting on them too. So we aren't directly involved in the digital experience team with those, but we will sometimes get requests for assistance like, hey, you're good with, front-end HTML. Can you help me out with this email? Or, we need a graphic or something. Or on the landing page itself, I helped Jackie create landing pages in Marketo so that they could create their own pages when they needed it without having to go through the about.gitlab interface. And so some of that is in this. This is an example of what one of those pages might look like that's generated in Marketo. It's not done on the About GitLab website. You can see the subdomain page.gitlab up there. And it looks pretty similar. It's styled how about.gitlab has been styled historically. There are options on this page to basically, add more info on the left here. They can go in and use a WYSIWYG to customize the messaging. They can customize the form itself using Marketo. They can add images up here, different things. So it's a highly customizable landing page system. So that's just something to be aware of, that we did build that for them. And we may get questions from time to time asking, can we work on it? This is where I've kept the code. There wasn't a repository for it before. It was just you log into the Marketo interface and start typing, which not ideal. So I separated CSS and some HTML examples, and you'll see all these Marketo string, Marketo name attributes in there and default. So basically, this is within the Marketo interface. Someone has to type in a string, and the string's default value is highlight white, and the ID that string is attached to down here in the HTML is flex1 color. So if we look for flex1 color, you can see that it's down here. And there's this kind of bracketed syntax that Marketo uses, flex1 color, $ bracket variable. So that's kind of how they store theirs. I believe it's more PHP based. So that's why it looks a little different than sort of Ruby stuff. So this is just kind of a window into a world we're probably not going to interact with very much, but it's important to know that it's there.
Brandon, I had to say something on that too.
Mm-hmm.
The editor in Marketo. So this is so much better than what I've done in the past, because we kept all at the last job I was at where we worked with Marketo. We kept everything in Marketo for the one trade-off here, which is that Marketo has some requirements depending on your configuration of what you need to include or whatever, right? These meta fields are their formatting, and so there's not a linter in a text editor you could use for that, right? So if you're working on this and you make changes here in the repo and then you go to copy paste it up into Marketo, you may have a couple more steps left if Marketo's hey, we want this, or we expected this value. So you're not quite done until it's past the linting in the Marketo instance itself, which is just an extra step to keep in mind if you're doing a whole bunch of it.
Yep, for sure. Very true. And the editor will fortunately tell you when you try and save it that, some variable is wrong usually. So it's not a huge deal, but it's like you said, just something to be aware of, that there's more to it than just copy paste. So anyway, let's see where blah blah blah. Okay, so who else are stakeholders for Marketo systems? The product growth group, led by Hila, has in the past, basically anything you do after you say click on a registration process, it takes you into GitLab's actual sign-up system. It's not on the about.gitlab website, it's on the product side of things. That's where they come in. and Marketo is tied into, I believe, some of these sign-up flows, or at least something that syncs with Marketo. So sometimes product team will have a question for us, or they may want to know, like, hey, you know, we're suggesting changes to this page because it impacts sign-up flow. So it used to be we were the marketing growth team and they were the product growth team, and that didn't exactly encapsulate the scope appropriately. We're focused on inbound leads, and they're focused on the whole nurture process of a buyer's journey after they've signed up. You know, how do they use the product? What, you know, how do we keep them? Retention. So it's acquisition, retention, and you know, that sort of things. It's not just getting leads. So that's why there was a bit of separation there. But yeah, sometimes they'll ask us questions about, you know, what we've been working on for those sorts of things. Yeah, so, and here's kind of an insight on the org chart. I linked to, you know, Gila's the director of product growth, and some of the other team members that have been working with us in the past, Jensen and Sam and Mike in particular. But yes, so yeah, that's kind of an insight into things we've covered so far, who the stakeholders are, who else uses Marketo, you know, privacy related laws, scoring leads, and where you might find a Marketo form on the About website. And yeah, I just wanted to recap that before kind of moving on to the next subject of programming forms for Marketo. So another resource I linked here is, you know, basically if you look at the code, you'll see, let's see, blah, 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 blah. I haven't looked at this code in a while, so apologies. First off, this is the file that I'm looking at now is called form to resource. This is a shared code that I wrote so that each individual form used in our system is not Snowflake code. Basically, this is used by a lot of different pages. And so at the top, you'll see Ruby variables that get filled in, that you know, are basically later placed into the JavaScript in multiple spots. So you'll notice at the top here, there's if defined webcast, if webcast has recording, you know, and it's not just webcast, right? But webcast is one particular form of it. So other things that other types of categorizations that we do on our end that says, you have viewed a webcast, you have expressed interest in a demo, you have started a trial, you know, this is a white paper for public sector, or, you know, that kind of thing. So when you go down to look at the data layer push here, event, and it basically says the type of form. So it's important to know that that's there so that we can sort leads into the right bucket and score them appropriately. So if you ever create a form, just make sure that the, or if you ever add a form to a page, just make sure that the form type variable is passed. And so this is an example of the code that is the shared resource, but let's see here an example of a page where that form is used. So you'll see form type, or let's see, form ID, form type webcasts, and some of the other variables that get passed into the form. So that's defined in the front matter. And, you know, this is kind of old code that I haven't looked at in a while. Obviously, when we move towards a CMS-based system for the entire website, a lot of this stuff might change. This is kind of how it's working right now.
Where did you get that form ID? Is that generated somewhere, or do we auto increment somehow?
Yeah, so that is a good question. The form ID comes from whatever marketing partner is asking us to put a form on the page. So they'll say, hey, I created this form in Marketo. It's got an ID number of 1592 or something like that. And usually they don't vary a lot because they want to reuse resources as well. So, you know, 10 different pages might be using the same form. And what the ID impacts is it says, hey, Marketo, where did that, oh, Google Doc, there we go. hey, Marketo, where can I get a form that's 2-column and asks people for phone numbers? That would be the form ID number, basically.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm just going to add a note here to follow up on that for myself. Cool. So how are Marketo forms applied to the page? So this is basically, it's not as self-evident as one would hope, right? It never is. Let me walk and talk here at the same time. So you can see that the page starts off, the form isn't there. So what's happening is JavaScript is fetched from the Marketo system. So that's way down here where it says, basically load form, and then it gives you our instance. It gives you our instance ID. It asks you what domain you're loading to, what the form ID is, and then it says put the, all this basically says put the form on the page. And so the page gets the form appended to it, and then some other things that happen. HTML is appended to the page using JavaScript. We don't control their HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, but what we then do is we run JavaScript that resets their CSS. Basically, they append it to the page, we remove it from the page. It's just the nature of these kinds of things. So if I go over and link to, thought I linked that in this document. Destyle JavaScript, here we go. So this is basically, this is in our JavaScripts folder under scripts. This is an overall shared global JavaScript that's on every page. And if you load it, or if you open the file, you'll see this destyle Marketo forms function. So basically, it's going to remove their styles from the page. So
Brendan,
why is that important? Sure.
Oh, can I just pause you? Would you mind scrolling up a few lines here? There on line 77, Marketo forms 2. This has like gotten me in the past. That's like it's an object in the global window object that gets loaded by Marketo, and I think it's you've got a script tag, an inline script tag above, right?
Yes.
There,
yes.
right? Yeah. So like that inline script tag is what makes Marketo forms 2 available in the window. So like if one of two things has like gone wrong for me in the past, either I didn't realize I needed that and so I didn't include the script tag, and I didn't have it, or because it's an inline script tag, sometimes you get bit by like specific like CORS rules, and I know you've got stuff in the agenda for this, but like this is a place where things can go wrong if you load the inline script tag incorrectly, and then you won't have Marketo forms 2, and you'll be like, I'm looking at all the example code on Marketo, and like everything is the same, and it's like if you don't have it available, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yes, very good points. Basically, it's a multi-part system, like you said. So we download the JavaScript from them, and it's an object that then gets attached to the window, and then we say, hey, object, go do your thing. So got to have both parts. Let's see. What was I? Oh, so I was talking about the JavaScript that resets their CSS. The other thing to know that's unfortunate about Marketo, well, I mean, it is what it is. It's not necessarily unfortunate, but is if you look at how their HTML is structured by default, Marketo form row, Marketo field descriptor, Marketo field wrap, label, it's highly nested. The classes are automatically generated, so you can't necessarily style on them very easily. There aren't necessarily class names. So let's say I wanted to style on the work email address field. How would I do that? I want to style on the thing that's surrounding it, let's say, because I want to include the label. There isn't a class, right? It's just Marketo field descriptor. And with CSS, you can't travel up the DOM. You can only style on an object specifically. So what we do sometimes, not always, mind you, but what I prefer to do is there's additional JavaScript here in the shared JavaScript called class name forms from values. And it basically goes and it says, look at the HTML that's in the DOM. And this input has a for value, I think, somewhere. But basically, it takes some of the HTML values that aren't class names, travels up the DOM, and applies it to a higher level object that then you can target with styles. So let's see, I said label. So blah, 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 label, get the, well, anyway, I don't need to go into the details. You can read the code. I don't remember if it's working or not at this point because things change. But it's good to know that there are gotchas about styling it, basically.
Yeah, I had to do that in the past before for one of my projects. Yeah. Interesting.
Let's see.
Wow, I'm not the only person out there.
What was that?
I said I had to do that before for one of my projects. And seeing you doing this, I just said to myself, wow, I'm not the only crazy person out there.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to do JavaScript to help the CSS than it is to just try and figure out how do I make this look like it's supposed to. But yeah. Cool. So that's basically how we get from HTML to a styled form. There are some default styles coming from Bootstrap that govern forms. And it's very generic stuff, high level, display inline block for a label, that kind of thing. Then there's styles for forms that we've inherited over time. So, spaghetti code over the past, 6 years or whatever that I came here and it was already there. It's good to know that these things are there because I'm sure moving forward as we adapt our Slippers design system and try and make these forms pretty, you got to know where the styles are coming from that we can, detach and modify and that kind of thing. Sometimes over the years, I've been asked to create, various snowflake kind of styles. So, a compact version of the form that maybe doesn't have the labels on it, or maybe, tries to do the label gets inserted inside of the text input rather than above it, that kind of thing. So there's one that's called form compact. There's one that's called form to resource. Honestly, I don't remember what's in there at this point, just because I think it's related to some of the stuff it looks like basically making sure that things stretch full width and other stuff like that. And that's got button shadows. And then there's one that's called form to column, which we don't really use, but basically you can imagine if this form takes up the whole page width, it's a one column thing. And then on the left-hand side of the form is maybe first name, and then the right-hand side of the form is last name, and then the left-hand side is email, and then the right side's phone number. So it takes the form, makes it full width, splits it into two columns. We haven't really used that, but it's good to know that it's there in case we do need to use it. I think we've used it maybe once or twice, and it didn't last because of if we go back and look at the page I was just looking at. Actually, I'll go click on an earlier one. So if we look at this example landing pages, marketing programs a lot of the times loves this format where the form is on the right in a second column. They don't want the form to take up the full width and have the story either above or below. They want them to be you're looking at both at the same time. So that's kind of why that particular format isn't tending to be used. So scrolling down to the JavaScript code and where it's coming from, I already mentioned earlier the form to resource file. And just for some background on the naming, I was a little new at GitLab there, but if you go to the resources tab on our website, a lot of these have attached Marketo forms. So that's kind of where I was like, here's a form, you get a resource. That's why that name is there. And as we're looking at this, I just want to mention again, we have callbacks in there for other tools like Demandbase and Google Analytics and such. So it's important to know those are there. Another version of this is form to resource multiple. So what this means is it's very similar. Some of the variables had to be changed because the way Marketo works, it attaches to an ID. And so if you have more than one form on the page, the auto-generated IDs and class names and whatever might not be unique enough. So you put 2 forms on the page, you're filling out the second one, it's not working. Why not? It's because the events were attached to the first one only. And so there's a second version of the JavaScript, and this is copied from, I don't remember where exactly. I want to say it's a Stack Overflow post. I wish I had, oh wait, here we go, adapted from. And basically, if you go visit this, you'll see that, this person said, this is how you get multiple Marketo forms on a page. Some smart person many years ago figured this out for the rest of the world, and we're forever thankful. But yes, so it's just something to be aware of, that if you're going to put multiple Marketo forms on the same page, you may need to use a different version of the JavaScript. And so an example of that is we have a task coming up to add a sign up form to the footer on every page. It's something simple like this, seemingly simple, right? But now you have to go back and make sure every form on the site works such that there can be 2 Marketo forms on the same page. And a lot of these things that I'm mentioning as gotchas, there may be better ways to do it. For example, long-term, we would like to use their API to submit forms, certain forms. It's a brand new feature that they just implemented, and I think it might still be in beta, it might not, I don't remember, where we don't have to use this JavaScript-based workaround to go fetch it from them to put it on our page, right? Like we can use their API directly. So then we wouldn't have to write these JavaScript workarounds to say, hey, we got multiple things on the page. Anyway, so it's kind of similar vein to what Sami was talking about earlier. Can we improve the user experience, right? Like, yes, but this is just how it is at the moment. So
I think also, if I can add to that, because it's like this was my life for so long, and I just like see all the similarities from my last job where we had these same like wants on the dev team. One of the like Marketo is cool because it like really provides a lot of like out of the box utility for people who are like not developers to move quickly on form processing. Like all the like forms are like the the thing that makes the internet so useful, and they're also really hard to do right, and Marketo allows people to do them right quickly. But it also means that like there's a lot of velocity behind people who are like not on the dev team. They're like, oh, like, here's like, I've made 100 forms this year, right? And so as they make 100 forms, if we want to go and like change up our implementations and like make our developer experience a little nicer, right? Like we're just contending with a lot of motion in parallel, and so like there's just like so many implications and considerations about it that it's not just like we're maintaining some library and like what if we could clean up our library. It's like, yeah, it's all the good things about Marketo make it just so much more cross-functional and a little more challenging to coordinate between teams who are not always in direct communication. So I just I think the API would be a game changer. And like this is like I have thought about using the Marketo API for the last 3 years of my life across 2 different jobs and never done it because it's just like you never get around to it because you're working on all the other stuff you gotta get in parallel, and that's super reasonable because at the end of the day the Marketo stuff like works as it is. Like that's the takeaway is that the Marketo forms are good, like, and they work well for the people who need them. So it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there's still things that we always like want to do better.
All very good points, especially about the velocity and how it impacts different teams. Marketo is great at what it does. When you want it to do something that it's not meant to do, as with all tools, it becomes harder. So yeah. A couple of examples. So I mentioned earlier the shared JavaScript code that a lot of forms do use on our website. Sorry, that's the wrong file. Anyway, form to resource, this one. However, not all forms on our website use it. Why is that? Well, because over time, there's only so many hours in a day. And so we got a request to say update the resources pages. And so we applied the JavaScript there. And then we got a request to update the webcast pages and we applied it there. So there are still several pages that don't use that because we never got the request to update them. It wasn't in our sprint or whatever to update them. So the sales page, for example, has some extra requirements. So it doesn't use this shared JavaScript code. It's just here on the page. It does some other things like, Google Analytics function here to get the client ID and tracking ID and report those back. So there are a lot of pages on the website that you might get a request to say, hey, can we update this Marketo form? Sure. Oh, oops, it's not using the shared JavaScript. So now I got to go edit that page differently from all the others. And it may be missing functionality that is in this other JavaScript. So the answer may be, hey, I'm going to apply the shared JavaScript, or the answer may be, hey, we can't do X unless I copy paste it from the shared JavaScript. So just be aware that there are snowflakes out there on the About site that use different code paths. Yeah. So we've already gone over, kind of some of the gotchas when programming for Marketo forms in our About website repository. One of them is localhost, right? I'm working on, a page, let's say, that I locally, and I'm putting a Marketo form on it. Yay, the form pops up and, it's there. Obviously, something's working right. But when I go to submit the form, because of localhost JavaScript concerns and cross-origin resources and stuff like that, where it's not within the same domain as GitLab.com, you go to submit you can fetch the form, but when you go to submit the form and you say, you filled it out properly, you click, it just gets stuck on please wait again, because the Marketo system, when someone clicks that button, is expecting to send it somewhere. We can't send it somewhere because it's not within the same domain. So just be aware that you may have implemented the form properly on your local host. You don't necessarily know for sure because you can't actually submit that data. When it gets to a review app in our, in our GitLab system, you have a merge request up, there's a review app. Because it's a live URL, it can then go through and it's on the GitLab, one of the GitLab domains that's accepted. So that's kind of a way to test, hey, did I, get the final implementation correct? Another thing to be aware of is just, let's see here. Oh, so all that's happening when the Marketo form is completed, let's say on the demo page, you complete it and, it goes through and I say, make sure to submit the thing and get the success state as well. All that's happening after you click, I can, you fill out the form, you submit it, goes through. At this point, what's happening is there is a display none applied to certain parts of the page and a display block applied to other parts of the page. So it's a show hide basically in JavaScript. So this was always there. You click the form, it submits, and then JavaScript triggers a different part of the page to show up. It's not like we're saying, hey, Marketo, can you give us the success portion of the page, right? Like the success portion of the page is there. So we write the HTML on the About website, we write the styles on the About website. It's just hidden with a display none until it's good to go, which is done via callback event from the Marketo script. And yeah, so that's kind of it for now for the recording portion of this. If there are any last minute questions or anything like that before I stop recording, let me know. Otherwise, give me the thumbs up and we'll call it an end.
I just had a quick question.
Sure.
Say like a request comes our way and it lands on my lap. I've never like played with it before. So is there like a good example of something that's like like, especially because we have like snowflakes, is there like a place where I should be looking to like start my like journey of trying to understand it? Because I imagine then like trying to jump into like the not snowflakes like right away might like just be like, what is going on, you know?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I'll have to ponder that for a minute before I can give kind of a good example, because I don't want to give you the wrong example of a good example, and then you're kind of like, what did I do? All I can say is that something that does use that shared resource, a lot of the gotchas are kind of already figured out. Obviously, it's more daunting because you have these variables that you don't know about, but because it's already built, you can basically pass in an ID, put the form script tag on the page, and it should work. And you'll so I can recommend the resources pages as a good example to work from, but at the same time, some of these are actually in the Marketo system itself. It looks like most of them are these days. I guess the developer survey might be a good one to look at. It uses the shared code, but it's not like super complex as to what it's trying to do. And it has examples of like scroll to that point on the page and stuff like that. It's pretty obvious when you're working on it. But to find one without all the shared code, that's a snowflake or whatever, like the sales page, those are probably good examples, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Oh, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Do you know, are we using the Munchkin stuff for Marketo?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
And so that is loaded, I believe, via Google Tag Manager.
Okay.
Let me just check real quick. But that's part of why cookies are required to use Marketo, is because Munchkin is on the page. It needs to set a cookie. Marketo says this form is going to use Munchkin. And so the two are kind of intertwined. There's an issue out there that we want to explore removing Munchkin from certain pages so that we don't have that cookie requirement. It hasn't been done, but yeah, it's...
And Munchkin is like retargeting, tracking cookie. Like that's why the cookie bot stuff matters for it, because it like does all the cross-site things that you would expect a retargeter to do.
Yep. It looks like it's loaded in our script handle include that runs at the end of every page that says, hey, use jQuery and Bootstrap and our scripts file, and then apply some Marketo Munchkin stuff. So I don't think it is loaded via Tag Manager. I may have misspoken earlier. But yeah, so that's Marketo in a nutshell.
I have one also quick question, kind of came up
Sure.
Similar to Javi's question. The ones that are snowflakes that needed some sort of special kind of functionality, what sort of things have you run into that they need that the traditional shared JavaScript doesn't cover?
Yeah, so I'll just pull up as an example the sales page, just because it's fresh in my mind as an example. So if we're going through, you can see that right now it's got the set options here. Not all of the forms have that set options. This one has demand base. Not all of them have demand base. Not all of them need demand base. Some other examples, if you're looking at I mentioned earlier, being able to apply class names to the form elements, that's in the shared JavaScript, but it's not going to be in the snowflakes because that's something we added extra. Some of the other things is this JavaScript at the top that's defined as gated form after success due. So gated content form, so you're using a form to download a resource. So this is a callback function where on success, I say, run this function. And so then you can go back and, have the confirm form hidden and the, or become visible, and then you hide the Marketo form and you say, if this is a webcast video container, show it, scroll to the top. So it's these kind of shared utilities that are not in these Snowflake events. So, it doesn't, it's basically, on success, hide the form and make the success message visible. It doesn't have the, scroll to top. It doesn't do some of the other things. So those are kind of example. Oh, and another thing about demand-based, right, is there's basically, it says load demand base, but it doesn't have another part of it which says once you've filled out the email address, go ahead and append that to the URL. And that's needed by certain marketing programs that add the parameter to the URL. And it's only done on pages with this shared code, I believe. And it's not because we don't want to do it everywhere. It's just because they're snowflakes and they don't have that shared JavaScript. I haven't seen that in use for a while, so it might not be necessary in certain circumstances anymore, but it's just another one of those things that's custom written and good to know about.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? All good for now? Obviously this is a high-level overview. Y'all haven't worked with it yet, so I'm sure once you run into it, you'll have questions, but yeah. Cool. So thanks for participating, everyone. It's great to share this knowledge, and we'll have this recording up soon. Later.